What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Good to have you here today. You know, back in January, I talked to a gentleman named Joe Amaral, and he had a book out a couple years ago called Story in the Stars, and that was a topic that I was really interested. Great chat. If you missed it, go back and check it out whatever platform you're on. He has a more recent book out, and we touched on it at the very end, and then he sent me one, so I got my own. And I started looking at it, and I was like, my goodness, this is really good. And so I was like, hey, Joe, can you come back and let's talk about this other topic? And graciously, he said yes. So I've got him back just because it's good. This could actually, literally, I know people say this all the time, this really could change your life depending on where you're at. If you're in a place where you feel a little stuck, where you don't know what to do, you're just maybe fighting depression and things like that, this is going to motivate you. The rest of you guys, it'll inspire you and educate you. So we're going to have a great conversation. I appreciate you guys being here. And Joe, man, great to have you back.
Listen, man, thanks so much for asking me to come back. I didn't say anything before, but like I've been interviewed literally hundreds of times over the past 20 years. And I got to tell you, man, back in January when we talked, that was the most fun and probably the best interview I've ever had. I mean, you ask the right questions and you know how to keep flow. So when you said, will you come back? I'm like, in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So thanks.
All right. The check is in the mail. Briefly, I know we talked about this before we started the interview, but briefly, I want people to know because some people will recognize you and go, I recognize that guy, mainly those north of the border. But tell people a little bit, because you were on Huntley Street for like a decade, right?
Yeah, well, I had my own show for a while that we filmed on location in Israel, mainly like in Jerusalem, in the Galilee. I've been to Israel 40 plus times. I mean, it's been my second home for a long time. And so that broadcasted on basic cable here in Canada across the country. And then just slowly over time, you know, Huntley started having me on as a guest and then as a guest co-host and a regular co-host and eventually the host of the show. So we were on basic cable in Canada. My goodness, they're going on 40 plus years now. It's the longest running TV show in Canadian history.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate to be part of that team. So but, you know, the Lord called me
you're up
to
there.
Liberia.
Well, we'll talk about that at the end, but
yeah.
You're up there and you're up there with Red Green, are you not?
He is here. I don't know him personally, but he is up here.
As far as, I mean, you're just recognizable in Canada. So every American's going, what? What is he talking about? Okay, that's not what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. Is a book that came out just last November. It's called Get Off Your Ash. Now, some of you right now, especially if you're raised in church, certain churches like mine, you're like, did he? No, I didn't say. And yes, I get that it's a play, but there's a message you need to hear. So get past that if that bothered you. Joe, let's dive into this because, it's a title that some people do a double take at. And I know, some people in the church are probably like, oh, well, that's not appropriate. But let's get beyond that because this message is life-changing. Take us into that. And what does that mean? And we'll talk about a little bit why you wrote it.
Sure. I mean, it's a play on words for sure, because once you get to know me, you know my personality. I love to joke around. But if you get beyond the title of the book, there's so much depth there. There's so much meaning for any person, believer or not. In fact, the book isn't written for Christians. It's written for people who are struggling with dealing with their past. So because of, the limited success that I've had in my life, people would always say to me, like, how does a guy from Toronto, actually not even from Toronto, from Milton, a small suburb, an immigrant from Portugal, like, how do you go from hosting the biggest show in the country and we raised tens of millions of dollars in my previous ministry, and I was traveling all over the world. And people say, like, how do you do it? I said, well, it didn't just come to me. I wanted to say, I had to get off my butt, but I'm like, how do I say that without saying that? And a dear friend of mine came up with that phrase from the book of Job that, Job had to get off his ash. He was sitting on a pile of ash after he had lost everything he had worked so hard for. And the title just resonated with me so deeply. I'm like, that's what it is. We have people both inside and outside the church who are stuck in the past, and they don't understand why they're acting the way they are today. It's because they haven't been able to let go of the past. They're like a boat that's tethered to a dock, and you can crank that engine all you want, but you're just going to blow out, man. You're going to smoke out in a glorious puff of smoke or whatever. So this book is about helping people to go back and realize what the ash is and how do we get off of it and stay off of it to understand who we are today and be what we want to be, moving forward.
Yeah. So let's talk about Job a bit, because it literally was a pile for him. Explain that, because there's a lot of depth there, and I think people are going to start to see themselves in the story of Job in a way they've never ever even thought about before.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Job goes beyond what the culture expected of him. In that day, when you were grieving and you were in a time of remorse, you would always cover yourself in ash. You put it on your arms or put it on your head. People would see you; they know that you were grieving. So that's what people expected Job to do when he lost everything. But he goes one step beyond. And when you think about what he did, it was quite extraordinary, because he's a full-grown man with grown kids. And the Bible says he gathered up so much ash. It's in Job 2:8, if people want to look at it. He gathered up so much ash that it was big enough that he, a full-grown man, could actually sit on it. Now, that's a lot of ash. Where do you get that from? Usually you would burn one little animal or something, and you would have a little bit to cover yourself in. And he comes from kind of the far Middle East, like not in Israel, but he's east of that. And in that culture and in that time period, it was very common to burn the dead, humans and animals. And you think of the description the Bible gives us of how many oxen and donkeys and goats and sheep that he had, and servants, and all of them were killed. And then his 10 children, his 7 boys and his 3 girls. You're like, oh my Lord, what if he had taken the ash of their bodies and he piled it all, and then he sat on that? Well, now that ash takes on a whole new meaning. It wasn't random sacrifices. It wasn't everybody collecting them, bringing them together. All this ash represented what he lost. In that ash, there was pain, there was hurt, there was anger, there was frustration, there was shame, there was all of these things. And Job sits on that for 40 plus chapters. And he goes on the biggest rant of humanity, of loathing the day of his birth. Oh, that the sun wouldn't shine on my birthday. And, what an awful day. And it's not till the end of the book that God restores to him twice what he had before, and he's able to move forward. What happened to Job? How did that guy go from sitting on that pile of ash, sulking, and letting that ash seep into his system and slowly begin to affect who he was? How do you get to the guy at the end of the book who's free and is doubly blessed? So that's the journey of the book. We're following Job. And I don't know about you and people watching this today, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who can resonate with that story of loss and shame,
Yeah, and it's not just, Job wasn't just sulking. This is real. We know people that, maybe have lost their job and they're struggling with it. I'm depressed. I've lost my job. And I feel for anyone who's had that kind of loss. Man, when you're talking about losing loved ones, it's hard when you lose. I know when I was a kid and I lost my grandparents, that was traumatic. Fortunately, my parents are still with me, but I don't look forward to that day. I've lost a younger sister. That sucked. But to lose your children, parents aren't supposed to bury their children. And that pain is real. And to lose all of them, the pain being so real, I can't imagine. I might be mad at God too. What do you say to those people who have had a very real loss, whatever level it is? It all hurts. And they're mad at God. They're sitting there in their pain, and they're mad at God like Job was.
Sure. Job was mad at God. I was mad at God for a long time. My dad died of cancer a few years back, and I'm a good guy. I was blessing Israel. I was tithing to the church. I was preaching in church every weekend. People were getting saved. I mean, I was actually by the Sea of Galilee when I got the news that my dad had deteriorated to a place where he was just outside of coma. And I remember, Randy, looking out, at the Sea of Galilee saying, Lord, I can't look at a place where you didn't perform a miracle. You cast out the demons over there. You walked on the water over here. You healed a woman with the blood here. You did all this. And I prayed, and my dad still died. And I remember being so angry with God, and almost like Job, I felt entitled, like I had earned the right to keep bad stuff away. And I think we do that. Like we feel like we've built up this credit with God and nothing bad's going to happen to us.
I hear you, but at the same time, I also know that there's scriptures that will give you, victory and declare and the miracles coming. So I don't think it's always just entitlement, but I think it's what it is short-sightedness. In other words, we see what's here, we see the material, and God's going, no, look, you need to look at the eternal. He's got bigger priorities than we do. And I think that's a lot of what Job realized.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the human experience, right? I mean, we only see, like you said, we see the now. We don't see eternity. So it's hard for us to understand and grapple with it. And so you ask, like, what do I say to people who are angry with God, who are disappointed, who are hurt? I'll say this: the longer you sit on your ash, the longer you sit on your pain, your anger, your resentment, your bitterness, all that, you're hurting yourself. Because the longer you sit on it, what happens is it begins to seep into your system. So this is what happened to me. I didn't talk about it for a long time, but about 5 years ago, I started to talk about it, where I started to have memories and flashbacks of being sexually abused as a young boy by grown men. And all of a sudden, all of those images started coming back, and all the shame that was associated with that. And not even realizing how long I had been sitting on my ash, that shame of what would people say about Joe Amaral, right? If they found out that happened to him, what's wrong with you? Why'd you let that happen? Or how could this go on? And so I sat on that, and I didn't realize, Randy, but over the years, it began to alter my personality.
Yeah.
I'm a funny, or thinks he's funny, kind of guy. I was the life of the party, always the loudest guy in the room. And I didn't realize that I was overcompensating for all the shame that I was feeling inside. So if I'm loud enough, nobody's going to get close to me. And so I began to alter who I was to cover up what I was going through. And Job does this throughout the book when his friends come to him and they say, hey, listen, these things happen. And he says, don't you know who I am? He says, I was the eyes of the blind. I was the legs of the lame. People would bow in my presence. They would open up the gates for me when they saw me. Like, this is what Job says to his friends. And he's trying to, and that's why I was referring to what I said earlier. Like, sometimes we feel like, I'm so good. How could something so bad happen to me? And look at that guy who's not living a godly life, who's not living a good life, and they're doing great. Like, how does that work, right?
Right.
And Job is wrestling with this, and this is the conversation he's having with his friends. And I can't think of a person alive who hasn't had something happen to him that they don't understand. Yeah. Why does God let this happen to me?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you haven't, this would be a good thing to prepare for, because it will. You just haven't gotten there yet. So this is the book, Get Off Your Ash, and we're talking about the ash heap of your past, pain, shame, disappointment, all these things. And I think, I know because I read the chapter titles, all of which will make you laugh if you have a sense of humor. But you got one that goes to the very real thing of dwelling in the past. You've got to you got to set your mind on part of getting off this, getting past this is not dwelling there. Explain that.
You're talking about chapter 3?
Well, I think it is. Yeah, take a couple. Take your head out. Yeah.
So chapter 3 is take your head out of your ash. Now, I know people are saying, hey, Joe, that's a little close. No, but I want you to think about it, right? It's funny, but it's serious at the same time. Because if ash is hurt, and if it's pain and it's suffering and it's all that, we need to get our mindset out of that defeated stage of our lives. Because what happens is we work so hard to finally get off that pile of ash. We're like, wow, I'm free. I'm no longer feeling that pain. It's great. And then something happens and boom, we go right back.
Right back, yeah.
You know, I had people tell me when I was younger, you're no good. You're never going to amount to anything. Your family are a bunch of this and that. You guys are never going to do anything. So like, what are you doing? And I carried that with me. Even when I had like a best-selling book, even when I was like traveling all around the world, that little voice was always there. Yeah, but, and I kept going back to that pile of ash. I kept going back to that word that was spoken in a negative way against me. And this is what chapter 3 is about. And, you know, I talk about it in other places too, where if we keep going back to our past and we keep going back and sitting on that pile of ash, we're never going to get to where we want to be. Right. You know, like if you want a resurrection, something has to die. So if we don't let the past really die, if we don't truly bury what happened and deal with it, it's gonna keep coming back. And so it's so important for us, no matter where you are on your journey of faith, is to learn to deal with what happened, acknowledge it, be honest about it, you know, and also to understand why you are the way you are today. I think that's really what I wanted to talk about in the book, is because, you know, like a wife will say, hey, you're not the guy I married 20 years ago. No, he's not. He sat on that ash and he's allowed it to change him from the inside out. And you become a little more curt. I actually developed social phobia. I was afraid of crowds, and my job was to preach to crowds.
Wow.
You know, if I was on the highway, Randy, and cars were too close to me, I would start to suffocate. You know, I began to change. I was on anti-anxiety, anti-depression. I couldn't sleep. I was shaking. I had all things happening to me because I didn't have what it took at the time to get off of that pile and to stay off of it and not go back to it. And this is the thing that we do. We carry that pain and that defeat with us through our lives, you know.
What were your steps to start to break free from that?
Yeah. I mean, I wish that the last chapter had here, do these 3 things and you'll never have a negative thought again.
Right.
Everything will be great. You know, I do give a couple of practical things. For me, when I started seeing a counselor, what she said to me was, write out what you're feeling, write out a letter to the people who hurt you, to the predators who did that to you as a young boy. Write it unfiltered, unedited, write it, whatever is in you, get that out. And then you can choose to either delete it or send it or archive it, whatever you want to do. And for me, that was a huge step, and just like extracting the poison, if you will, you know, getting it out of your system. So that was one thing that I did. And then the other thing was find one person. You don't need 10 people. You don't need a whole church. Find one person that you value and trust enough to share it with. And for me, Randy, that was my wife. And I don't even know if I said this in the book, but right before our 25th wedding anniversary, that's when all the memories of my abuse came back to me. They were buried for 30 plus years. And right before my 25th wedding anniversary, we're about to fly down to Mexico. Boom, everything comes back to me. And I remember being so scared and saying, if I tell her what happened, if I tell her what I've become, she's going to leave me. She's going to not know who I am. She's going to be so upset with me. And this is the thing with darkness, like lies breed in darkness. And I had this fear, but as I began to share and just be honest about my experience and say, this is what happened to me, and this is why I become the way I am. I'll never forget my wife. She was looking at me and she goes, there you are. She goes, it's been a while.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, dude, that crushed me. And it showed me the power of love. If you have that person in your life that you can confide in and share it with, I think people are so afraid of being rejected. And that's part of the lie that the enemy and just our natural nature gives us. But I think people will be surprised by the reaction they would get from people when they open up and they're honest about their ash, about their past.
Yeah. So obviously that was a turning point for you, but not the end
Yeah.
game for you. What's it looked like to continue to walk away from that pile of ash? I mean, because you kind of have to do it on a regular basis, right?
Every stinking day.
Yeah.
Every day, I used to get on the platform with giants, and I'd be like, no, you don't have to be as good as them. You don't have to be as big as them. You just have to be you. And so every day it's choosing to acknowledge there's a pile of ash there, understanding what's in that, but choosing to walk away from it. And also the joy that's on the other side of that pile. And so today, man, I get to do the greatest job in the world, I think. I get to serve as a missionary in West Africa and Liberia, and we bring food and medicine and healthcare and hope to people. And if I would have stayed on that pile of ash and salt and said, oh, poor me, I'm a victim, look what happened to me. Remember what that person said to me when I was younger. So the other side of the pile, to me, outweighs the negativity of sitting on that pile. So knowing what you have to gain by getting off that ash, as scary as that might be, the reward is worth the risk. Life is waiting for you, but you got to make that decision to say, no, I'm not staying here anymore. I'm getting up. And like Job, so here's the thing. At the very end, in Job chapter 42, verse 6, he actually says, I despise myself. Like that's a big statement to make. And if you read it in the context of the conversation with God, it's not so much that he hates himself as he hates what he's become.
Who's become, right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He goes, I despise myself, and I've been sitting in dust and ash. I'm so ashamed. I've wasted all this time I could have been doing, but instead I sat and I sulked and I blamed everybody and took no responsibility for my part in what I'd become.
Yeah.
And that's another big part of the healing journey, and it's really hard to get to, is acknowledging that you have a role too. Acknowledging what you've become, to adapt with what happened to you. And so if we don't deal with that past and we don't understand, I know I've said this before, but if we don't understand what happened to us and how it's changed who we are today, we're never going to get to where we want to be. So that was my experience.
I can't help but think about people who are trying to get away from their past, but literally, the past follows them, it could be a criminal record, it could be, a divorce and your ex's friends are still in your church, there are a lot of ways that ash will stick to you, and as much as you try to rub it off or whatever, it blows in the wind and there it is on you again. I can't. I'm guessing that you don't live in the same neighborhood as your abusers, so you have that separation. No. What about people that are like, man, I am running from my pile of ash, but it is following me. It is blowing and it is sticking, and I don't know how to get it all off.
Yeah, and the truth is, you may not be able to get it all off. Like you said, there may be situations where you're too close to it. In proximity, in relationships, it might be a family thing that happened and you can't get away from it. But even in those situations, you still have a choice to make, right? You can pull a Job and sulk for 40 chapters and get upset and say it's because they did this to me, because this happened. Or even you don't deny the ash, you don't deny the past. Okay, that's a huge thing. That big old pile is there. It's not going to go away. But I'm choosing not to sit on it. I'm choosing not to let it make me into a negative person. Yeah. And so I think for me that's a big part of being able to deal with that proximity issue, is making that choice.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the reality is you're right. You're right on every account here, because even if it's right here, you still have a choice. You may feel like you don't, but you do. And then not letting the toxicity of it seep into you. That choice you make determines whether it really gets into you. Once you get out of it, you start to feel better. The rewards on the other side of saying, I'm just not, I refuse to sit in it, to dwell on it, and it can blow all around me, but I'm not, I'm going to walk away from it. How can we even do this on our own, or maybe with a counselor? I don't see how you don't do this. I'm sorry, I don't see how you do this without getting really close to God on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're a Christian, which a lot of people who are watching this are, absolutely getting close to God and believing what he says about you.
Right.
Not what your past says you're damaged goods. You know, I always say I'm bruised, but I'm not broken. You know, I'm not staying down. No way. God has too much for me to do. There's too many people that God has a plan for that I need to be a part of their journey. So absolutely. But even for people maybe who aren't, you know, from a faith background, it's surrounding yourself with people who will celebrate your journey, not blame you for it or get upset at you for it. And the last chapter, we call it, there's two. There's one is kiss your ash goodbye. And the other one is kick your ash. Right. Like you have the right to hold those things that hold you down at bay. Like you have the right to say no. You can be right here yelling in my ear, saying what you want. No, there's a barrier here, man. I'm not going to let it penetrate my brain. I'm not going to receive that. I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to play into your game. You have the right to say, this is my space and you can't live in it. God bless you. I wish you well, but no, I'm not going to allow you to pour ash on me. I've worked too hard to come out the other side.
Right. No, that's good. So here's the good news, and I'd like to hear from your experience, because I'm last time after our last interview, I was like, you know, there's a lot of Americans right now watching going, what's that weird American flag behind him? And it's not.
This?
Yeah. So that's not an American flag. That's not a Puerto Rican flag. That's nothing. That's Liberia. And that is a part of Joe's reward. And I don't know what your reward is for getting off your pile of ash and dust in your past and really moving forward. But there is that reward, which is what God has designed you to be, wherever that is. But Joe, I want to hear about yours in particular, because you told me that you wouldn't be able to do these things if you had stayed sitting on your own pile of pain and shame.
Exactly, man. You know, if I just would have said, yeah, you know, this is who I am. I'm a survivor. I'm damaged goods. I'm just going to kind of eke out an existence and hopefully, you know, make a little change in this world. But when I decided to get off that ash and confront it, I mean, and if they get the book and they look at the cover, you're going to notice there's 10 words written in the ash. There's shame, there's pain, there's hurt, because that's all a part of it. But I think, oh, Lord, what I would have missed out on if I had stayed where I was, if I would have chosen to remain in ash, I can't imagine what my life would be like. So today I have the pleasure of serving in one of the poorest countries in the world with some of the sweetest people you'll ever meet. There's so much need. And Randy, I'm not on TV anymore. I don't have a big following anymore. I'm not pastoring a big church anymore. I'm making the least amount of money I've ever made in my life before. Can you zoom in on that smile? I have never been more fulfilled in all my life. And you learn real fast. Money's great. You need it. You got to pay your bills. I understand that. But you're never really fully alive until you start living for someone else. And when you get on the other side of that pile of ash, dude, it's a brand new experience. And for me, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I don't care what people say about me. I can't believe you left this. I can't believe you're not doing that anymore. Nobody knows who you are. Good. God knows. And the people who I'm helping know who I am, and I wouldn't change a thing. And I would encourage people, it's worth the risk of finding someone you trust and saying, this is my ash, man. This is what I'm going through. And I need you to walk with me through this journey, because when you get on the other side, it's worth everything.
That's all you need to know. And it's, you're not so special that it won't work for you. You know, and that's a lot. Right. That's one of the lies that'll come in your head. Is like, well, great to work for him, but not for me. No, I mean, this is the truth. So I encourage you, pick up the book. You can go to Joe Amaral is it .com or .org? I forget.
.org.
.org. And then he's got this nice little site, getoffyourash.today. So, and it looks like that, so you can check those out. But definitely check out the book. It'll help you move beyond your pain. Joe, man, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for coming back and sharing, and thanks for being so transparent, because nobody likes to put their ash on the line. Oh, I just threw another funny. Okay, but you're seriously your willingness to be open like that's helpful to people. So thank you, man.
Well, I appreciate that. I believe that transparency is the breeding ground for trust. And if you're honest with people about your journey, then you'll encourage others to be honest about their journey. Mm-hmm. And having gone through this by myself for so long, I don't want anyone to ever have to go through this alone. So if this helps one person shorten that sentence by a month, by 10 years, I'm happy to share.
Appreciate it. And appreciate you guys watching. You might know someone that this will help. And so I would encourage you to hit share, hit like or follow, subscribe if you haven't done that. And do check out the book. You can get it at joeamaral.org or getoffyourash.today, or just Google it. You'll find it. I'll show you what it looks like. Looks like this right there. So check that out and come back next time. We've got more great, uplifting, encouraging conversations for you right here on Life Today Live.
Above all